I'm Anya Coops-McKinnon and welcome to DW News. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is in London on what is only his second trip abroad since Russia invaded Ukraine nearly a year ago. Zelenskyy is meeting with the British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, and he's due to address both houses of Parliament at any moment. We'll be bringing that to you live. He'll later be visiting Buckingham Palace for an audience with King Charles. The UK is one of the biggest military backers of Ukraine and has sent the country weapons and equipment worth more than $2.5 billion. And for some analysis, we're going to be bringing in DW correspondent Birgit Mass, who is in London, and joining me here in the studio is DW's chief international editor, Richard Walker. We're seeing live pictures at the moment of the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy in London. He is due to be addressing the House of Parliament at any moment, and we will be bringing you that speech live. Volodymyr Zelenskyy, the President of Ukraine. Standing ovation for President Zelenskyy in London.
Mr. President, Leskarvo, Prosimo, the rest of us, welcome. Not many people stood here today in this significant setting will realise that our friendship began on the 8th of October 2020, when you were the first ever head of state that I met as Speaker. We hit it off immediately, with much laughter over an English afternoon tea, and of course, chocolate cakes. And we forged an instant bond, despite wearing masks and being socially distanced at the opposite ends of a large table, because like the rest of Europe, we were working out how to deal with COVID. Little did we know that our relationship would grow in such turbulent times. On the 24th of February 2022, the second invasion of Ukraine began. On the 8th of March 2022, there was another first for us both. I suspended the House of Commons so that you could address in Ukrainian through the screens in our chamber, which we still refer to them as Zelenskyy screens. The atmosphere was electrifying. You could hear a pin drop before you came online. A very, very rare thing in the House of Commons. You spelled out the horrors of the first 13 days of war. Your speech was devastating and powerful. Today, on the 8th of February 2023, now deep into the war, we are honoured that you have put yourself at risk to address us and again shine a light on the fact your country is still fighting for its survival. This hall has been the place of many great historical events. Your presence here today adds another to them. The war, as you know better than any of us, has lasted for nearly a year. As you told us last year, this is a war Ukraine did not start and did not want. But it is a war you've had to fight, and our commitment to support you and your people has not wavered. I was considering what could be said at this important occasion. I thought back to the 1990s. Then we hoped that all countries that emerged from the former Soviet Union could secure freedom and prosperity. There was a moment of hope over that time, and we knew it would be a long time that each country could choose its own destiny. It is a tragedy that Ukraine's efforts to bring freedom, prosperity to its people has been met with war and death. Last year, building on our friendship, I welcome your wife, Madame Zelenskyy, to Parliament to open deliberately a provocative exhibition. I wanted to ensure the experience of your people is kept at the forefront of our minds. I do not believe any of us in this room were complacent about the reality of conflict, but those displays shocked us. The images stayed with us. They brought home the horrors of war. Horrors inflicted on your people, fighters, civilians alike. Horrors which cannot be avoided or denied. I applaud Ukraine's refusal to forget what is you and your people are fighting for. In the words of the Ukrainian Eurovision winners, Kalyusha Orchestra, they said, "I always find my way home, even if all roads are destroyed." Fighting for a country is not simply fighting for territory. It is a fight for home and for an ideal. The endurance of the people of Ukraine, honours those ideals. Their refusal to allow war to destroy their humanity honours their ideals. Quite rightly, last year you said Ukrainians have become big over the 13 days of this war. You have become even bigger in your determination, not just to fight for your country, but to stand by the ideals you are fighting for. We will not give up on those ideals. We'll continue to support you against that Russian aggressor. And I pledge here today, in front of all of you, to do all I can to keep the plight of Ukraine in the spotlight. Later this year, the UK and Ukraine will be united in music, but we will always be united in our unwavering belief in the power of democracy. Slava Ukraina. Mr. President, please.
Thank you so much. Thank you. The people of the United Kingdom and their honourable representatives, all the people of England and Scotland, of Wales and Northern Ireland, of all the lands which have been home to brave souls since Europe came into existence. I have come here and stand before you on behalf of the brave, on behalf of our warriors who are now in the trenches under enemy artillery fire, on behalf of our air gunners and every defender of the sky who protects Ukraine against enemy aircrafts and missiles, on behalf of our tank men who fight to restore our Ukrainian borders, on behalf of our conscripts who are being trained now, including here in Britain. Thank you, Britain. And who will be then deployed to the front line, skilled, equipped, and eager to win. On behalf of every father and every mother who are waiting for their brave sons and brave daughters back home from the war. Mr. Speaker, you may, I think, well remember as roughly more than 2 years ago, we met with you here in Parliament. Great honor was for me. And I remember we enjoyed tea. We talked, of course. We talked a lot about our people and about our countries, about the British and Ukrainian political traditions. Mr. Prime Minister Rishi, when we had our meeting earlier today, and I said to you that I will tell a story in my address to the Parliament, and a story about my feelings on my first visit to London as President in autumn 2020. The program was packed. Royal Highnesses William and Catherine, and Buckingham Palace, and aircraft carrier of the Royal Navy, the Westminster, of course, Downing Street, and of course, the war rooms. And there is an armchair in the war room, the famous Churchill's armchair, and a guide smiled and offered me to sit down on this armchair from which war orders had been given. And he asked me, how did I feel? And I said that I certainly felt something. But it is only now that I know what the feeling was. And all Ukrainians know it perfectly well too. It is the feeling of how bravery takes you through the most unimaginable hardships to finally reward you with victory. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your bravery. Thank you very much from all of us. Yes, please. That is for you. All applause for you. London has stood with Kyiv since day one. From the first seconds and minutes of the full-scale war, Great Britain, you extended your helping hand when the world had not yet come to understand how to react. Boris, you got others united when it seemed absolutely impossible. Thank you. All of you all showed your grit and character back then, strong British character. You didn't compromise Ukraine, and hence you didn't compromise your ideals, and thus you didn't compromise the spirit of these great islands. Thank you very much. And of course, everybody understands that our countries knew absolutely different times. Our nations defended freedom in the Second World War. The Iron Curtain divided us. Our people went through crisis and growth, through inflation and periods of social losses and social gains. It was tough, but we always found strength and stamina to move ahead and achieve results. This is the bedrock of our land and your traditions. Ukrainians and Brits defeated the fear of war and had the time to enjoy peace. No matter what we encountered on different stages of our and your formidable history, and you and us and the whole mankind achieved similar result. Evil lost. Evil lost. We will always come out on top of evil. This lies at the core of our, but also your traditions. However, the horizon never stays clear for a while. Once the old evil is defeated, the new one is attempting to rise its head. Do you have a feeling that the evil will crumble once again? I can see in your eyes now we think the same way as you do. We know freedom will win. We know Russia will lose. And we really know the victory will change the world. And this will be a change that the world has long needed. The United Kingdom is marching with us towards the most important victory of our lifetime. It will be a victory over the very idea of the war. After we win together, any aggressor, it doesn't matter, big or small, will know what awaits him if he attacks international order. Any aggressor who will try to push the boundaries by force, who will inflict destruction and death on other peoples, who will try to endure his dictatorship at the expense of other people's blood in criminal and unprovoked wars, as the Kremlin does. Any aggressor is going to lose. Ladies and gentlemen, we have already achieved remarkable results, and we must make every effort to turn our achievements into the foundations of the future global security architecture. The world needs your leadership, Britain, just as it needs Ukrainian bravery. When the full-scale invasion began, we, together with you, Britain, and United States and other allies, formed a true coalition of friends. That is very important. You were among those very few who had helped before the large-scale invasion began, exactly as it will be necessary every time in the future to prevent aggression from happening. Your help was preventive. We must take these principles of preventive aid to those who are threatened with aggression, and preventive sanctions against those who threaten aggression as basic principles of the world anti-war policy. We created a coalition of NLAW. Thank you. Of NLAW and Javelin that stopped the advance of the Russian army from the first day of the invasion. We built the coalition of artillery rounds and a coalition of air defense, which allow us to save the lives of our children, of our people, of our civilians, our women, our elderly, and our cities from Russian atrocious occupation and missile terror. We put together a powerful sanction coalition, and your leadership is protecting international legal order through sanctions against a terrorist state cannot be questioned. And we have to steadily continue along this way until Russia is deprived of any possibility to finance the war. Most importantly, together with the G7, we brought about a coalition of values. a coalition that protects the rule-based world order and human rights, a coalition that will work in such a way that over time there will simply be no gray areas in the world in which human life doesn't matter. In order for it to be so, there must be justice. Anyone who invests in terror must be held accountable. Anyone who invests in violence must compensate those who have suffered from terror. Terror, aggression, or other forms of state violence. Our proposals for the creation of a special tribunal for the crime of Russian aggression against Ukraine and special compensation mechanism which will compensate war losses at the expense of Russian assets are based on such principles. Justice is one of 10 elements of the peace formula proposed by Ukraine and supported by Britain. I thank you for your readiness to invoke the formula. Thank you, Prime Minister. Thank you very much. As I already mentioned, Ukrainian soldiers are being trained in Britain, in particular to operate Challengers, your main battle tanks, and it's a tank coalition in action. And I thank you, Rishi. Thank you very much for this powerful defensive step for tank assistance. Thank you. The coalition of long-range missiles is the latest of all. It will allow us to make the evil completely retreat from our country by destroying its headways deep in the occupied territories. And it's not just, I'm not speaking just about weapons. We proved together that the world truly helps those who are brave in defending freedom, and thus paves the way for a new history, a history of the world that knows how to be quick in help, who knows how to be effective in defense, who knows how to remain principled in dark hours, who implements its treaties and arrangements in good faith, who does not allow perpetrators to enjoy immunity, who knows how to overcome veto when it's abused, who knows no fear, and who knows how to win. This shall be the new reality of the free world, I'm sure. However, evil is still around today, and the battle continues. Yes, we know how it's going to end and how we are going to feel on the day victory comes. Every day we continue to pay with lives, pain and tears for bringing victory closer, with the lives of our people, our heroes, whom we lose in battles, with the lives of our heroes who take life and death risks every day to save as many of our soldiers and civilians as possible. And today, I will have the honor to be received by His Majesty the King. it will be a truly special moment for me, for our country. And in particular, because I will convey to him from all the Ukrainians the words of gratitude for the support His Majesty showed to them when he was still the Prince of Wales. And I also intend to tell him something that is, I think that is very, very, very important, not only for the future of Ukraine, but also for the future of Europe. In Britain, the king is an Air Force pilot. And in Ukraine today, every Air Force pilot is a king. For us, just for us, for our families. Because they are so few, they are so precious that we, the servants of our kings, do everything possible and impossible to make the world provide us with modern planes to empower and protect pilots who will be protecting us. And I'm proud of our Air Force. And I brought a present from them to you, Great Britain. Yes, please, open, please. Yes. Yes. To the speaker. Yes, speaker. I will. I will explain. It's the helmet of a real Ukrainian pilot. He is one of our most successful aces, and he's one of our kings. And the writing on the helmet reads, "We have freedom, give us wings to protect it." I trust this symbol will help us for our next coalition of the planes, and I appeal to you and the world with simple and yet most important words: combat aircrafts for Ukraine, wings for freedom. Great Britain, you and us both struggle for peace, but instead we are forced to face the range that seeks to deprive us of peace and everything else that is valuable in life. Unfortunately, it is in human nature to allow evil mature. It then stands up against humanity. It then destroys and kills. It launches aggressions and breaks people's lives. You and us have already fought together against such evil. You and us already have the experience of defeating the evil that is generated by human nature. I'm not saying there will be no more wars after the war ends. No. It is impossible to completely erase evil from human nature. Yet it is in our power to guarantee with words and deeds that the light side of human nature will prevail. The side you and us share, and this stands above anything else. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for your support and leaving British Parliament 2 years ago. I thanked you for delicious English tea. And I will be leaving the Parliament today, thanking all of you in advance for powerful English planes. By the way, it's almost 5 o'clock. God bless Great Britain and long live the King. Slava Ukraini!
And you have been listening to the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy addressing Parliament in London in the UK. He's receiving a standing ovation right now for the speech that he just made, in which he thanked Britain for its support of Ukraine. He said that London has stood with Kyiv from day one. He struck a defiant tone, saying that freedom will win and Russia will lose.
Thank you, Mr. President, for being with us today and for the powerful address that you have just given. The bravery, resilience and fortitude of you and...
So that was President Zelenskyy delivering his speech. And for some analysis of what he said, we have DW correspondent Birgit Maas, who's joining us from London, and here with me in the studios, DW's chief international editor, Richard Walker. Birgit, if I can start with you, tell me what stood out for you in President Zelenskyy's address to Parliament. How do you think it will have gone down there in the UK?
I think it was one of the most powerful speeches there in Parliament in Westminster Hall. He, I think, struck a very careful balance between being very emotional, also humble. He mentioned meeting the king, but also being defiant and being strong. He said in Ukraine, every Air Force pilot is a king. So he was basically trying to have the Ukraine and the UK presented as almost one entity. He said we a lot, we fight against evil and we are brave. He thanked the UK many times during the speech for standing by Ukraine, and he thanked Boris Johnson personally. But he was also, very, very emotional at some times, but not forgetting that he also comes with a wish list, and he did mention the fighter jets that he said are needed and that would give Ukraine wings to fight for its freedom. So an incredibly powerful speech, I would summarize.
Richard, he's a talented orator, isn't he? I mean, as Birgit said, there was emotion, there was humour. He also struck an extremely defiant tone. What did you make of his speech?
Yeah, I mean, he is we've sat at this desk kind of covering so many of his speeches over the past year, and he really is a very, very good communicator. Obviously, he has extremely good speechwriters supporting him as well. And I think if you look at, I mean, he really tailors his speeches to his audience, you know, so he's there in the United Kingdom, in Westminster Hall, in this historic chamber. You could see that it was packed with the members of Parliament. They were standing room only. They were all standing. You had, you know, the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition sort of next to each other. Extraordinary, really, scene there. We didn't get so many shots of that, but it was really standing room only. And you know, he kind of really, I mean, it sounds cynical, but not, it was really effective that he pushed the British kind of buttons. I mean, I kind of just jotted down a few references. I mean, World War II was obviously very, very frequently referred to as, you know, this kind of huge part of the British kind of national psyche, the experience of World War II. Churchill, you know, several references to Churchill.
Conjuring the war spirit, really.
Conjuring the war spirit. Zelensky's own experience of having kind of been in the place where Churchill, in the chair that Churchill sat in during the Second World War a couple of years ago, how he felt about that. talking about freedom, about good versus evil, about bravery, about leadership, all of these these values and ideas that can kind of get. You really hear a lot about in kind of the British kind of national culture, referring to the royal family, even linking the royal family to what is his next kind of big ask, which is fighter jets. Kind of, giving this helmet and saying that in Britain, the King, former Prince Charles, who trained as an Air Force pilot, in Britain, the King is an Air Force pilot. He said, in Ukraine, every Air Force pilot is a king. And saying that, what their next big kind of request from the West is for fighter aircraft. I mean, even tea, multiple references to tea.
Which was the humour, really, wasn't he? And he got laughs for that.
Which was the levity. So, yeah, really kind of knowing effectively to push British buttons, but also really making a very effective kind of connections between that rhetoric and the goal that he has, which is to try to kind of use Britain as a kind of a bit of a lever that's out front and willing to kind of, take the next step in terms of providing weapons, and hoping that he'll get the Brits on board at some point for fighter jets.
And he praised the UK, didn't he? He said, you were supporting us even before the invasion began. Your help was preventative in some ways. So really laying it on thick and sort of saying, you were there for us.
Yeah, and what we've heard from the British side today is that they're going to, kind of one of the next steps. They've announced some certain packages of sanctions, certain new announcements, and also training for Ukrainian pilots on NATO fighter aircraft. So this could be kind of beginning to lay the ground for potentially supplies of NATO quality aircraft being provided to the Ukrainians down the road. But of course, as we heard just very recently from Joe Biden, the US president, he was asked point blank, is he going to provide fighter jets to Ukraine? He simply answered no. So I think we're in the early stage of that debate at the moment. But Ukraine and Zelenskyy clearly seeing the UK as a country that can really kind of, he hopes will push out in front on that.
Birgit, if I can turn to you now, as we just heard Richard saying, he made an impassioned plea for fighter jets. He brought a fighter pilot helmet onto the stage. Now, we know that Rishi Sunak has just announced that Britain will train Ukrainian pilots on NATO standard fighter jets. But of course, as we've been saying, this is not uncontroversial. Can you tell us more about that?
The UK has been training Ukrainian soldiers since 2014, says the UK government. And in recent years, since the war began, they've also made it public that they are. But so far, they have been training, let's say, ordinary soldiers. Today, they've announced that they are going to expand this training. So they're expanding it to Marines, but also to fighter jet pilots. Now, that doesn't mean that they are also going to deliver the fighter jets that you would expect kind of go with the training. And only a few days ago, the UK Defence Minister, Ben Wallace, has just said that there will be no magic wand for the Ukraine to receive those fighter jets from the West. But also, that's significant. The UK hasn't excluded it. So unlike the US, the UK hasn't said this is not going to happen. So I agree with Richard that this might be interpreted as a shift in the West's thinking. So the UK has also said that they are expanding the training of the Ukrainian soldiers. They're hoping to train up to 20,000 Ukrainian soldiers this year. And obviously this is significant because they will be trained to use the battle tanks and all the artillery, all the machinery that's being used by the West. And we know that battle tanks have been secured by Ukraine. So this training in the UK is very, very important for the Ukraine.
Birgit, I just wanted to ask you as well about that moment when Zelenskyy singled out the former British Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, to say thank you. Boris is loved by many Ukrainians for his support of the country. His successor, Rishi Sunak, is he trying to sort of follow in Boris's footsteps? Is he trying to be a hero for Ukraine as well?
Well, yes, Rishi Sunak has visited the Ukraine, and he, I think, is trying to evoke the same spirit. So in the UK, it's not very controversial for the country to support Ukraine. Majority of the British public supports it. They even support it, although it means higher inflation, higher food and higher energy prices. So Rishi Sunak is definitely, also with his statements today and inviting President Zelenskyy for such a high-profile visit, he is definitely saying that the UK is unwavering in its support, and he's saying that the UK is there for the long term, and that's being said explicitly also today, that they really want to make sure that the Ukraine can defend its borders.
Yeah. Richard, we are expecting Volodymyr Zelenskyy to be visiting Brussels tomorrow. This hasn't been confirmed, but there is this special summit in Brussels tomorrow. More concrete announcements of military support are not expected. So what will Zelenskyy be hoping to get out of this trip?
Well, I think, and just to be clear, we haven't had confirmation on that, and there's been quite a bit of back and forth. You know, this idea that he might travel to Brussels was leaked at the beginning of the week, and then that led to some speculation of, OK, is that now a security risk? So we don't know yet for sure if he's planning to go to Brussels. But it would be an obvious step, you know, after being in London. Of course, some people are kind of looking at the fact that he went to London first. You know, first of all was the United States, of course, just before Christmas, then going to London, and then potentially after that going to Brussels as a kind of sign of what Ukraine sees as the hierarchy of supporters, that the United States is out front, that Britain is the kind of like, well, the United States is the biggest single supplier. Britain is sometimes out front in terms of what it's willing to support. But we just heard from Olaf Scholz, the German Chancellor, earlier today here in Berlin. He was addressing Parliament here, and he was adamant that Germany, although it gets criticised sometimes for being a kind of laggard, insistent that Germany is very much neck and neck with Britain in terms of the volume of supplies that it's providing. And what we've had from the German side just announced yesterday is a pretty large package of the older model of these Leopard tanks that there was such a lot of debate about recently, up to 178 of those over the course of the next year or so, going to Ukraine from a number of countries. So there is certainly movement on the European side as well. That was an announcement between the Germans, also the Dutch and the Danes. But we'll be watching out, of course, what happens tomorrow to see if there's more.
All right, DW's Chief International Editor Richard Walker and DW correspondent Birgit Maas in London. Thanks so much for that. You've been watching special coverage from London on DW News. Thank you so much for watching.
Every journey is full of surprises. We've gone all out to give you some tips.
One day in Vienna, following the footsteps of the great Beethoven.
I'm in Europe's